Maxine Waters thought she was completely untouchable, right until Senator John Kennedy leaned into his microphone and delivered 11 quiet words that collapsed her 35-year political career in an instant. Ma'am, the only thing you've been reclaiming is your daughter's salary. The pointing finger stopped. It hung there, halfway between the witness table and Senator Kennedy's place on the banking committee. It stopped the way a hand stops in mid-motion while the body underneath it has just realized what it's done. Chairman Tim Scott didn't lift his gavel. Senator Elizabeth Warren, the banking committee's ranking Democrat, the woman who served beside Maxine Waters on every major financial fight of the last 13 years. It didn't finish the objection she'd begun 30 seconds earlier. Her mouth was still open. Senator Ruben Gallego, a Marine veteran of Iraq and the first Latino senator from the state of Arizona, set his pen down very carefully on his binder, the way a man sets down a thing he doesn't intend to pick up again. 3 rows behind the witness table, a 47-year-old black single mother from Compton, California, named Yolanda Mitchell, folded her hands in her lap and waited for the moment she'd waited 7 years to see. For anyone who ever waited, really waited, for a politician to be looked in the eye, on the record, under oath, and asked to explain exactly why she'd been writing checks to her own daughter on the working-class taxpayer's dime. This was the definitive moment. It was happening right there on C-SPAN, live in the United States Senate, and absolutely nobody in that room was ready for what Senator Kennedy pulled out of his folder next. Senate Office Building Room 216 wasn't supposed to be where this happened. The Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, chaired by Republican Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, with Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts as ranking member, had voted in February of 2026 by a bipartisan margin of 16-7 to invite Representative Maxine Waters of California to testify under oath. She was the lead subject of a hearing titled Examining Member Self-Enrichment and FEC Oversight, a review of slate mailer operations and campaign finance compliance. The reason the committee had voted to invite her wasn't political. The reason was a single document. On June 2, 2025, the Federal Election Commission had announced a conciliation agreement with a campaign committee called Citizens for Waters. The committee, which had been operated for 35 years by Representative Waters' longtime treasurer, David Gould, agreed to pay a $68,000 civil fine. The agreement specified 3 categories of violations during the 2020 calendar year. It knowingly accepted excessive contributions totaling $19,000 from 7 individual donors. It made 4 prohibited cash disbursements over $100 each, totaling $7,000. It failed to accurately report receipts and disbursements. Maxine Waters had 3 choices when the Banking Committee's invitation arrived at her Rayburn office. She could refuse and risk being held in contempt of Congress. She could appear and plead the Fifth Amendment, or she could walk into Hart 216, raise her right hand, place it on a book of her choosing, and answer every question under oath. She chose the third option because Maxine Waters had never lost a televised confrontation in 35 years of American political life, and she didn't believe she was going to lose this one. She walked into the hearing room at 9:51 inches the morning. She wore magenta, a Chanel suit she'd bought in Paris in the spring of 2017. The color she always wore for moments she intended to win. She carried a yellow legal pad that her staff joked nobody had ever actually seen her write on. She smiled at the photographers in the room. At 10:03, Chairman Scott gave the hearing to order. At 10:08, Maxine Waters made the mistake that ended her. Chairman Scott's voice was even. He was a soft-spoken man, and he didn't change for cameras. Madam Ranking Member, you're recognized for a 5-minute opening statement. Maxine Waters didn't place her hands on the witness table. She stood up. She rarely sat for opening statements. She learned in 1976, in the California State Assembly, that a woman who sits is a woman who can be ignored. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, though I want to begin by noting for the record that I don't recognize this committee's authority to summon a sitting member of the United States House of Representatives in the middle of an active session on a matter that is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the House Committee on Ethics, of which I am no longer a subject of inquiry, having been cleared in the year 2012. Mr. Chairman, this hearing isn't a fact-finding exercise. This hearing is the laundromat of right-wing media that has lied about my family for 30 years, given the imprimatur of the United States Senate. This hearing is the front parlor of a dictator-esque court. She raised her finger. The finger came up like a conductor's baton. The way it had come up at Stephen Mnuchin in 2017. The way it had come up at Scott Bessent 6 weeks ago. The way it had come up at Donald Trump 3,000 times in 8 years. Donald Trump is a dictator. The American people, in their wisdom, in their fear, in their fatigue, elected a dictator, and the United States Senate Committee on Banking is now the front parlor of his court. I will not pretend otherwise. I will not yield to the polite fiction that we are here to examine campaign finance. We are here because Donald Trump's Department of Justice cannot indict me, and so the Republican Party has assembled the next best thing, an inquisition. I will not be lectured today by a Louisiana plantation lawyer who voted to confirm 3 Supreme Court justices stolen from this country. I will not be lectured by a man with a Vanderbilt diploma who pretends to chew tobacco for the cameras of a network owned by Rupert Murdoch's children. I will not be lectured by a Republican Party that, in this very chamber, voted last year to invade Iran without the consent of the United States Congress. She turned. She faced Yolanda Mitchell, and I will most certainly not pretend to be moved by the testimony of a paid prop, a witness purchased by a Republican Party that has run out of legitimate arguments and now imports survivors of unrelated tragedies into its hearing rooms to manufacture sympathy. She turned back. She faced Senator Tim Scott. Mr. Chairman, with respect, sir, you're a black man. You carry on your back every day the burden of a Republican Party that hates you the way it has hated me. The difference between us, sir, is that I've always known who hated me. You, God help you, still believe you can earn their love. You will not earn it today. You will not earn it tomorrow. And when you go home to South Carolina at the end of all of this, sir, the same people who clapped for you this morning will be voting against your judges in the year 2028. She raised her finger again. She pointed it at Senator John Kennedy. You will not silence me, sir. I will not be silenced. She sat down. The applause from the Democratic side of the dais was absent. Senator Elizabeth Warren didn't clap. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, a moderate, looked down at the table. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, a Latino Democrat from Las Vegas, closed her eyes for 1 full second. Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, a black Democrat, a man who marched in places Maxine Waters had marched, looked at her once. Then he looked away. Senator Ruben Gallego, Marine veteran, 3 deployments to Iraq, the first Latino senator in the history of the state of Arizona, placed his pen down on his binder very carefully and didn't pick it up again. On the Republican side, Chairman Tim Scott didn't blink. Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming closed her notebook. Senator Katie Britt of Alabama looked down at her hands. Senator Pete Ricketts of Nebraska wrote a single word on his pad. Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee leaned back in his chair. In the second row of observer seats, the row reserved for House members invited by either committee leadership, Representative Joyce Beatty of Ohio sat with her mouth pressed into a thin line. She was 76 years old. She'd been served for 13 years on the House Financial Services Committee with Maxine Waters. She'd been chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. She defounded, with her own hands, the bipartisan Congressional Civility and Respect Caucus. She was the only person in the room who'd ever, in the privacy of a green room at MSNBC, called Maxine Waters her sister. She didn't move. 3 rows behind Maxine Waters, in seat 9 of row 3, Yolanda Mitchell was looking at the carpet. She decided 3 weeks ago, in the kitchen of her rebuilt bakery on Long Beach Boulevard in Compton, that she wasn't going to look at Maxine Waters until the moment mattered. Her son Marcus, 25 years old, sat beside her in a navy blue, long-sleeve button-down shirt. The shirt was buttoned at the cuffs. Marcus Mitchell wore long sleeves at all temperatures, in all rooms, except in the kitchen of the bakery, where his mother was the only person he allowed to see his arms. In row 4, seat 7, Sergeant Marcus Coleman of the California National Guard, 31 years old, 3 deployments, dress greens with 3 campaign ribbons, sat with his hands folded. He'd voted for Joe Biden in 2020. He'd voted for Vice President Kamala Harris in 2024. He'd asked the night before the hearing whether his presence might be misunderstood as a partisan endorsement. He'd been told by a junior staffer in Senator Kennedy's office that he was being asked only to be present, not to speak, not to be photographed, just to be in the room. He was in the room. Chairman Scott tapped his gavel once, very lightly. The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Kennedy, is recognized for 7 minutes. Senator John Kennedy didn't stand. A senator doesn't stand for a witness. He placed both hands flat on the dais. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him. The pad had 6 dates written on it in blue ink, and a single dollar amount circled in the margin. The dollar amount was $68,000. He looked at it, then he looked up. Madam Chairwoman, I beg your pardon, ma'am. The gentlewoman from California isn't the chairwoman today. Mr. Chairman. His voice was the voice of a man who'd grown up in Centerville, Mississippi, gone to Vanderbilt, gone to the University of Virginia School of Law, and then gone to Oxford in England, where the British had taught him that the only thing meaner than a Mississippi possum was a Mississippi possum that pretended to be a chicken. He spoke slowly. He never raised his voice. He never raised his voice in a Senate hearing in 9 years. Madam Ranking Member, the gentlewoman is partly correct. I'm from Louisiana. I'm a lawyer. I went to Vanderbilt. I went to UVA Law. I went to Oxford in England, ma'am, where the British professors taught me that the only thing meaner than a Mississippi possum is a Mississippi possum that pretends to be a chicken. I've thought about that observation a lot in the last 18 months. Now, ma'am, I'm not going to ask you about Donald Trump this morning. I'm not going to ask you about the 25th Amendment. I'm not going to ask you about civil war. I'm not going to ask you about Vladimir Putin or Bashar al-Assad or Israel or Iran or Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, all of whom you've blamed this morning for things you've been accused of yourself. I'm going to ask you about a check. Just one check, ma'am, to start. Now, before I do that, I want you to know something. Behind you, ma'am, in row 3 of the observer seating, is a woman from Compton, California. Her name is Mrs. Yolanda Mitchell. She lives at 4306 Olive Avenue. Her zip code is 90220. She's in your congressional district, ma'am. She's been in your congressional district her whole life. Her mother voted for you in 1990. She voted for you in 2010 and 2012 and 2014 and 2016. I'm going to let Mrs. Mitchell tell her own story when her time comes. For right now, Ma, I just want you to know. I know you saw her when you walked into this room this morning, and I know you saw the boy beside her, and I know you decided not to look. You don't have to defend the decision, Ma. I'm just naming it so we can begin. Maxine Waters didn't turn her head. All right, Ma. Let's begin. On June 2nd, 2025, 10 months ago, the Federal Election Commission entered into a conciliation agreement with a campaign committee called Citizens for Waters. The committee is registered to you. You're the candidate. Your treasurer, a man by the name of David Gould, signed the agreement. Your campaign attorney, a woman by the name of Leilani Beaver, sent a letter to the FEC in May of 2025, acknowledging the violations. I have a copy of the conciliation agreement here, Ma. It's signed, it's dated, it's publicly available. Anybody watching this hearing this morning can pull it up on the FEC's website in less than 5 minutes on their telephone. Page 2, Paragraph 1. Your committee knowingly accepted excessive contributions in calendar years 2019 and 2020, totaling $19,000 from 7 individual donors. The contribution limit is $2,800 per individual per election. Your committee accepted contributions in excess of that limit. Yes or no, Ma. Maxine Waters. The committee. Mr. Gould. These are administrative. Yes or no, Ma. The committee's own conciliation agreement, signed by your treasurer, says knowingly accepted. That's not me, Ma. That is the FEC. A pause. Yes. Page 2. Paragraph 2. Your committee made 4 cash disbursements during the 2020 election cycle, each in excess of $100. The total amount was $7,000. Cash, Ma. Federal election law caps cash disbursements at $100 per transaction. Yes or no? It was COVID. The pandemic. Our? Get out the vote. Canvassers couldn't process. 8. Madam Ranking Member. Yes or no? Yes. On June 2nd, 2025, your committee paid a civil fine of $68,000 to the Federal Election Commission to settle these violations. Yes or no? Yes. Now, Ma. I'd like to read you something. This is a letter your campaign attorney, Mrs. Beaver, sent to the FEC on May 14th of 2025. Quote, the committee acknowledges errors were made, which were not willful or purposeful. End quote. Errors, Ma. Now, I run a small farm in Madisonville, Louisiana. If I made $26,000 worth of errors on my federal income taxes, knowing errors, Ma. The kind your committee admitted to making, the IRS would fine me $68,000. The IRS would put me in a federal facility in Pollock, Louisiana, Ma. Where I'd learn to make license plates very slowly, one license plate at a time, for a number of years. A small, involuntary laugh moved through the room. It came from Senator Pete Ricketts. He clamped his hand over his mouth. It was too late. Maxine Waters' index finger came up. Stop. Did you hear what just happened? Maxine Waters, the same woman who for 9 years has pointed her finger at Donald Trump, at Stephen Mnuchin, at Scott Bessent, at every Republican secretary of every department, and demanded yes or no answers, just gave 3 yes or no answers herself, under oath. On C-SPAN, about a $68,000 fine her own campaign already admitted to in writing. The sheer audacity of that specific number hitting the public record was staggering. $68,000 was the exact price Maxine Waters paid for errors that were supposedly not willful or purposeful. But the hearing wasn't stopping there. As the shock of that admission settled over the committee room, what Senator Kennedy was about to quietly pull out of his folder next was going to make those first 10 minutes look like a simple warm-up. Now, ma'am, this part troubles me more. Your campaign committee, Citizens for Waters, has paid your daughter, Karen Waters, in installments over the last 22 years, a sum of approximately $1,200,000. Source: the Federal Election Commission's quarterly disclosure database, which is publicly available. Ma.am. On the FEC's own website, on a domain registered to the United States government. Between January of 2021 and December of 2022, 24 months, your committee paid your daughter $192,300. Source: the same database. The payments are categorized under the heading Slate Mailer Management Fee. A slate mailer, for the audience watching this morning, is a piece of paper that is mailed to voters in California. It contains an endorsement from a member of Congress, in this case you, ma'am, alongside the names of other candidates who've paid your campaign for the privilege of appearing on the same piece of paper. The paper is sometimes called a sample ballot. It's mailed to approximately 200,000 households in south-central Los Angeles. The candidates who pay your campaign for the privilege aren't constituents, ma'am. They're clients. The Federal Election Commission gave you an advisory opinion in 2004 permitting this arrangement. They told you, ma'am, that you could do it. They didn't tell you that you should. I know the difference, ma'am. I went to law school. As of this morning, ma'am, you are the only sitting member of the United States Congress, the only member of either party, of either chamber, of any state, running a slate mailer operation through your federal campaign committee. Your colleagues aren't doing this. Your friends aren't doing this. The members of the Congressional Black Caucus, of which you're the most senior living member, aren't doing this. Senator Warren of the Banking Committee, on which I sit, isn't doing this. Speaker Mike Johnson isn't doing this. Former Speaker Pelosi isn't doing this. You, ma'am, alone among 535 members, are doing this. And you've paid your daughter, Karen Waters, who runs a consulting firm called Progressive Connections, registered in the state of California, and who before that ran an organization called LA Vote, which the Los Angeles Times reported in the year 2004, had collected $1.7 million in mailer fees from local Los Angeles candidates over an 8-year period, over $1.200,000. Now, ma'am, in 2004, the LA Times asked you about these payments. You told the reporter on the record, quote, "We don't have to answer your questions. We are not bad people." End quote. Senator Kennedy paused. He looked down at his pad, then he looked back up. "We are not bad people, ma'am." That sentence is the most defensive sentence the human mouth can shape. People who aren't bad people don't say it. They just are. The median household income in California, as 43rd Congressional District, your district, ma'am, the district you've represented since 1991, is approximately $62,000 per year. Your daughter, Karen Waters, made nearly $200,000 in 24 months running a mailer business out of your campaign committee. That's more than 3 times the median household income in your own district. Ma. A. M. 3 times out of your campaign committee. Out of donations sent to you by the people in your district who believed they were sending money to fight for them in Washington. 3 times what they make. Ma.am. Out of money they sent you to fight for them. What kind of person, ma.am, takes 3 times what their constituents make paid out of those same constituents' donations, and roots it to her own daughter year after year for 22 years. I'll tell you what kind. Ma M. A person who has forgotten who paid the freight. Maxine Waters stood up. Her staff had told her not to stand. Her staff had told her on the night before the hearing that the optics of standing would read as panic. They'd walked her through the body language they wanted, hands folded, voice low, occasional concession that the committee had a right to ask the questions even if she resented the asking. She stood up anyway, because Maxine Waters hadn't gotten to be Maxine Waters by listening to her staff. Mr. Chairman, I have sat here this morning for 41 minutes. I have been insulted by a Republican senator from a state, Louisiana, that has the worst infant mortality among black children in the United States of America. I have been insulted by a senator who made his name on this committee by mocking a federal judge of color for not being able to define a legal term that nobody outside of Cornell Law School could define. I have been. Madam Ranking Member, I'm not finished. Mr. Chairman, I have spent 35 years in this Congress. 35. I marched in the city of Selma, Alabama, in the spring of 1965. Where were you, Senator Kennedy? You were 14 years old in Mississippi. Your senator at that time was a man named James Eastland, who had served in the United States Senate since 1943, and who had voted every single time against every single civil rights bill that came to the floor. You inherited James Eastland's seat in your party, sir. You inherited his Mississippi. I sat in this Capitol when Henry Hyde tried to break Bill Clinton in 1998. I sat in this Capitol when George W. Bush sent us to Iraq in 2003 on a lie that this body, which I served, voted to authorize. I sat in this Capitol when Donald Trump asked the United States military to clear American protesters out of Lafayette Park in 2020 so that he could hold up a Bible at St. John's Church. I have raised in this Congress, Mr. Chairman, over $1 billion in campaign funds for the Democratic Party. I have used those funds to elect black women to office in places where black women were not supposed to win. I have buried my husband. I have raised my children. I have paid my mortgage. I have served the people of California's 43rd District through fires, through earthquakes, through riots, through pandemic, through every catastrophe this nation has visited upon Los Angeles in 50 years. And you, sir, are going to sit there and tell me, that I have forgotten who paid the freight? I yield, Mr. Chairman, with contempt. She sat down. She didn't look at Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy didn't look at her either. He turned over the page on his yellow legal pad. Madame Ranking Member, with respect. Ma'am, I'm not going to pretend you didn't march in Selma. I'm not going to pretend James Eastland wasn't from my state. I'm not going to pretend that the Republican Party of 1965 was a party I would be wanted to belong to. I'm not going to do that, ma'am. I owe you better than that. What I'm going to do, ma'am, is read you something else. On June 8, 2025, about 3 weeks after your campaign committee paid that $68,000 fine, you went to a place called the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles, California. The facility was the site of public protests against United States immigration and customs enforcement. The governor of California, Mr. Gavin Newsom, your fellow Democrat, ma'am, had deployed a unit of the California National Guard to the facility to maintain order at the request of the city of Los Angeles. You walked up to those troops, ma'am. They were standing in formation outside the building. You wore a green jacket with the seal of the United States Congress on it. You identified yourself, and then you said, "And I am," quoting from the public transcript published by the National Legal and Policy Center, which you're welcome to dispute, ma'am, except that the words were captured on 3 separate cell phone videos. Quote, "Who are you going to target? If you were going to target me, you better aim straight." End quote. Did you say those words, ma'am, to American National Guard troops in uniform standing in formation on American soil? Yes or no? Maxine Waters, I asked them what side they were on. Children, American children were being. Ma'am, please. Yes? Senator Kennedy turned very slightly in his chair. He gestured gently, the way a Sunday school teacher gestures to a child in the back of a classroom, toward row 4 of the observer seating. Sergeant Coleman, would you stand for 1 moment, sir? Sergeant Marcus Coleman stood up. He didn't look at Senator Kennedy. He didn't look at the C-SPAN cameras. He looked at Chairman Tim Scott. He stood at parade rest. He waited. Sergeant Coleman is a member of the California Army National Guard. He was one of the soldiers in formation outside the Metropolitan Detention Center on June 8th of last year. He came here this morning at his own initiative. I want the American people to know, ma'am, that Sergeant Coleman is a Democrat. He voted for Joseph Robinette Biden in 2020. He voted for Vice President Kamala Devi Harris in 2024. He's never voted for a Republican in his life, ma'am, and he hasn't been asked to today. Sergeant Coleman is the man you spoke to, the man you asked on a public street to aim straight. Sergeant Coleman didn't say a word. He didn't turn his head. He didn't respond to the cameras. After 4 seconds, he sat back down. Chairman Scott tapped his gavel. The senator from Louisiana yields the balance of his time. The chair calls the second witness. Mrs. Yolanda Mitchell, please come forward to the witness table. Yolanda Mitchell stood up from row 3. She was 47 years old. She wore a navy blue dress that she'd bought at a Target in Long Beach, California, 3 weeks earlier for this exact morning. She walked the 8 steps from row 3 to the witness table. She took the chair to Maxine Waters' immediate right, the chair that 2 hours earlier had been set for an academic witness from the Brookings Institution who'd quietly withdrawn 3 days before the hearing. The clerk administered the oath. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? I do. Her hand didn't shake. Chairman Scott. Mrs. Mitchell, you're re-recognized for 2 minutes for an opening statement. Yolanda Mitchell didn't have notes. She hadn't written a statement. She looked for a long moment at Chairman Scott. Then she looked at Senator Kennedy. Then, for the first time that morning, she turned in her chair and she looked directly at the woman beside her. Maxine Waters didn't turn. Yolanda Mitchell turned back. She faced the dais. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come. My name is Yolanda Mitchell. I live at 4306 Olive Avenue in Compton, California. My zip code is 90220. I've lived in California's 43rd Congressional District my entire life. My mother, Bernice, voted for the Congresswoman in 1990. I voted for the Congresswoman in 2010, 2012, 2014, and 2016. In 2014, I opened a small bakery on Long Beach Boulevard. The bakery was called Yolanda's Sweet Home Bakery. I employed 7 people. 3 of them were teenage boys whose mothers worked overnight shifts at LAX cleaning airplane cabins. The boys came in after school. They learned to roll dough. I paid them $10 an hour in cash every Friday, out of a metal box I kept in the freezer. I paid them in cash because their families needed it on Friday, and the bank was closed on Saturday. In June of 2018, the Congresswoman appeared on a stage in Los Angeles before a public crowd, and she told the people of this country, on television, that, and I quote her, "Sir, because I've watched the video 300 times. Quote, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they re not welcome anymore, or anywhere. End quote. On the night of October 21st, 2018, at approximately 9:15 p.m., a customer left my bakery. He was a regular. His name was Mr. Lawrence Ortega. He was a retired postal carrier. He devoted that morning in early voting for a candidate not endorsed by the Congresswoman. He was wearing a red hat with white lettering. When he left my shop, 3 young men who'd been standing across the street, who'd watched the Congresswoman's speech that summer, who'd decided on their own. Sir, I don't blame the Congresswoman for what they did, that the speech meant they should follow Mr. Ortega and confront him, threw a dangerous, flammable device through the front window of my bakery, lit a rag, and threw a match. 3 of my teenage employees were in the back of the bakery putting away the closing dishes. My son Marcus, who was 17 years old at the time, who is sitting behind me right now in row 3, was in the front behind the counter. He'd stayed late to help me close. My son tried to put out the fire with a bath towel. He suffered second-degree burns to both of his arms, from his wrists to his elbows. Before the fire department arrived, he was hospitalized for 11 days at Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital on East 120th Street, in the Willowbrook section of South Los Angeles. The hospital is 2 miles from the home of Karen Waters, the Congresswoman's daughter, on Hancock Park. My son is 25 years old now. He works the dough every morning at 500 a.m. at the rebuilt bakery, 2 doors down from where the original one was. He wears long sleeves in July, in August, in every season, because he doesn't want the regulars to see what 2018 cost him. I gave one interview to the Los Angeles Times in November of 2018 after the bakery closed. The reporter asked me what I'd say to Maxine Waters. I told her, quote, I don't know what the Congresswoman meant. I just know what they heard. End quote. I received 73 severe personal threats over the next 4 months, 3 of my stylists. I'm sorry, 3 of my employees quit because their landlords told them they would renew the lease if they kept working at my shop. My own landlord refused to renew my lease in January of 2019. I closed the doors of the original Yolanda S. Sweet Home on February 11, 2019. Madame, Ranking Member, I am not asking for an apology. I am not asking for money. I've never asked for money. I'm not asking for justice. The boys who threw the dangerous object went to a state correctional facility in Solano County. The Lord settled that part. I'm asking, and I'm asking only this, that the next time a member of the United States House of Representatives goes on television and tells the American people to confront strangers in restaurants, that member remember that not every confrontation in the streets of Los Angeles ends with an argument. Some of them end with my son on a hospital gurney with second-degree burns on his arms. That is all I came to say, sir. I yield. Maxine Waters tried to speak. Mr. Chairman, I object to the relevance of this testimony. The acts of 3 private individuals, however tragic. Chairman Scott, Madam Ranking Member, the witness has the floor. You aren't recognized. But, Mr. Chairman, this committee has no jurisdiction. Madame Ranking Member, you out of order. The gavel didn't fall. He didn't need it to. Maxine Waters sat down. Yolanda Mitchell didn't look at her. Marcus Mitchell in row 3, in his navy blue long-sleeve button-down shirt, didn't look up. Yolanda Mitchell just told her story to the United States Senate, under oath, face to face with the woman whose words she traced to her son's hospital bed. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for revenge. She didn't ask for an apology. She just wanted the American people to know. It was a profound reminder that every Yolanda Mitchell in this country, from the mothers to the neighbors sweeping their porches every Saturday morning, truly deserves a microphone. The raw honesty of her testimony shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. What happened next wasn't written in any committee staffer's script, and the woman who stepped up to do it hadn't warned anybody, not even her own party, about what she was about to do. Chairman Scott looked down at his agenda. The chair recognizes, on a point of personal privilege concurrent with the jurisdiction of this committee, the gentlewoman from the state of Ohio, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, for 1 minute. Congresswoman Beatty, you've indicated to this chair that you have a statement you wish to enter into the record. Representative Joyce Beatty stood up from the second row of observer seats. She was 76 years old. She wore a black John knit suit and a small pearl pin she'd inherited from her late husband, Otto Beatty, Jr., an attorney from Columbus, Ohio, who had passed away in 2021. She'd served in the United States Congress since 2013. She'd been the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus from 2021 to 2023. She was, at this moment in her life, the founder and co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Civility and Respect Caucus, which she created with her own hands in 2023 inches. Response to a moment of incivility she personally witnessed in the well of the United States House of Representatives. She didn't look at Senator Kennedy. She didn't look at the C-SPAN cameras. She looked for a long moment at the back of Maxine Waters' head. Mr. Chairman, I'm a Democrat. I'm the chair emerita of the Congressional Black Caucus. I've served on the House Financial Services Committee side by side with Maxine Waters since the day I was sworn into the United States Congress. I've raised money for her. I've campaigned for her in California. I've sat on her right hand at 3 Democratic National Conventions. I've called her, more than once, in the privacy of a green room at MSNBC, my sister. I'm not going to defend the gentlewoman from California today. I'm not here, Mr. Chairman, to attack her either. I'm here because of what Mrs. Mitchell just said. I've spent 58 years of my adult life in this country as a black woman from Dayton, Ohio. I've buried my husband. I've raised 2 children. I've run for office in places where they didn't want me to win. I know in my bones what it costs a black woman to walk into a room full of Republican senators and tell another black woman to her face that she failed her. Mrs. Mitchell didn't come here to embarrass anyone. She came here, Mr. Chairman, because her son is 25 years old and he lives with scars he didn't choose, and he wears long sleeves in July because he doesn't want strangers in his mother's bakery to see what a speech in 2018 cost him. She turned, she faced the witness table. She looked at the back of Maxine Waters' head. Madame Ranking Member, Sister, I am asking you not as a member of the opposition, because I am not a member of the opposition. I'm asking you as a member of the caucus you and I both built when you and I were younger women in this town than we are right now, to look at Mrs. Mitchell just one time before this hearing ends and to say something, anything. The word sorry isn't required. The word I hear you would be enough. Just 3 words, Maxine. Just 3, today. She paused. Maxine Waters didn't turn. For a long second, the only sound in Heart 216 was the soft hum of a ventilation duct in the ceiling. Joyce Beatty, Mr. Chairman, I yield with sorrow. She sat down. Maxine Waters' frozen index finger was still in the air. Senator Kennedy didn't move. Chairman Scott reached for his gavel, the way a man reaches for a gavel when he's preparing to bring a hearing back to its scheduled order, and he was about to recognize the next member for questioning, when a man at the very far left edge who had been notified of the hearing only on the previous afternoon raised his hand. Chairman Scott looked at him. The chair recognizes the junior senator from the state of Arizona, Mr. Gallego, for a point of personal privilege. Senator Ruben Gallego stood up. He was 46 years old. He'd been sworn into the United States Senate on January 3, 2025, the first Latino senator in the history of the state of Arizona. Before he was a member of the United States Senate, he'd served 4 terms in the United States House of Representatives. Before he was a member of the House of Representatives, he'd served in the Arizona State Legislature. Before he was a member of the Arizona State Legislature, he'd served in the United States Marine Corps. He deployed to Iraq in 2005. His company, Lima 3/25, had taken some of the highest casualties of the war. He'd buried members of his platoon in Husaybah, in Al-Anbar province, on the 17th of April, 2005. He hadn't voted to confirm Senator Kennedy's preferred Federal Reserve nominee in 2025. He'd voted against most of Senator Kennedy's banking legislation. He'd told a reporter in November of 2025 that he disagreed with Senator Kennedy on every meaningful issue, except for the proposition that federal government employees should be paid during a government shutdown. He stood up. He adjusted his microphone. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm a Democrat. I'm the junior senator from the state of Arizona. I voted against Senator Kennedy as last nominee for the Federal Reserve. I voted against his energy and water appropriations bill last fall. I don't agree with him on the Build Now Act. I don't agree with him on the CFPB. I don't frankly agree with him on much. At 6:00 yesterday evening, Mr. Chairman, the Chief of Staff of the gentlewoman from California's Congressional office in Inglewood, California, called my Phoenix office. He asked my Chief of Staff to issue a statement this morning before the hearing began, denouncing this proceeding as a Republican witch hunt, as a partisan attack on a senior woman of color in the Democratic caucus, and as an attempt by Senator Kennedy to relitigate a federal ethics inquiry that was concluded in the gentlewoman's favor in the year 2012. I'm not going to do that. Mr. Chairman, I am a United States Marine. I served in Iraq in 2005. I lost members of my platoon in the city of Husaybah, in Al-Anbar province, on the 17th of April that year. The men I served with included men of every color and every faith and every region of this country. The sergeant in row 4 is wearing a uniform that I once wore. The sergeant in row 4 served 3 deployments to a country that none of his colleagues in the United States Congress have served in. The sergeant in row 4 is a Democrat, Mr. Chairman. The sergeant in row 4 voted for Vice President Harris in November. I'm not going to sit in a Senate hearing room, on the record, on C-SPAN, while a fellow Democrat suggests on a public street in front of 3 cell phone cameras that any American man or woman wearing the uniform of the California Army National Guard should be told, "You better aim straight as a political dare." He paused. He looked for the first time at Maxine Waters. "Madame Ranking Member, with respect, we disagree on policy. We'll disagree tomorrow. We'll disagree the day after tomorrow. I'll vote against most of what Senator Kennedy proposes for the rest of my time in this body. But the words you used in front of the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles last June were words, my mother, a woman who raised 4 children on a secretary's salary in a 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago, Illinois, would it have allowed me to say to a postal carrier, much less to a young man in a uniform standing on a sidewalk doing his lawful duty. Those words weren't the words of a Democratic Party I want any part of, Madam Ranking Member, and I'm not going to be the United States Senator who sits in this room and pretends otherwise. I yield, Mr. Chairman. He sat down. Heart 216 made a sound that wasn't a gasp. It was quieter than a gasp. It was the sound, if you've ever heard it, of an era ending. A Democrat. A Democrat. A United States Senator, a Marine veteran of the Iraq War, just stood up in a Republican committee hearing and defended a black National Guard sergeant against the words of his own party's longest-serving black congresswoman. Not because he liked Republicans, not because he agreed with Senator Kennedy, because of the truth. For those who'd been waiting their entire adult lives to see a politician finally put their country over their party, right there on C-SPAN with the cameras rolling in real time, this was it. He did it even after receiving a phone call from his own party's leader the night before, explicitly asking him not to. It was a raw reckoning, a moment of undeniable truth unfolding, live in the hearing room that nobody could ignore. Chairman Scott, the senator from Arizona's statement is entered into the record. The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Kennedy, is recognized for the balance of his time. Senator Kennedy didn't stand. A senator doesn't stand. He had 2 minutes and 43 seconds left on his original allotment. He used a minute and a half. Madam Ranking Member, I'm going to do something the gentlewoman from Ohio asked you to do. Ma'am, and I want you to forgive me for it, because I think it's the only thing I'm qualified in this room to do. I want you to know, ma'am, that I see you. I know you marched in Selma. I know you organized voter registration drives in Watts in 1973 when the police would let you do it. I know you carried black women into Sacramento in 1976 who wouldn't have made it there without you. I know you held the line on welfare reform in 1996 when Bill Clinton tried to break it. I'm not going to pretend, ma'am, that any of that didn't happen. It did, it counts. But that was a long time ago, ma'am. And what I want to know, and what I think Mrs. Mitchell wants to know, and what a whole lot of working folks in Compton, and Inglewood, and Watts, and Gardena want to know, is what happened between you and them somewhere along the way. You stood in this Capitol when Newt Gingrich tried to take Medicare in 1995. You stood in this Capitol when George W. Bush tried to privatize Social Security in 2005. You stood in this Capitol when Donald Trump tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act in 2017. You stood, ma'am. You stood every time it mattered. But somewhere along the way, ma'am, you stopped fighting for the folks back home, and you started writing checks to your own daughter. He paused. He looked at the yellow legal pad. The number 68,000, circled in blue ink, looked back at him. You were supposed to be the meanest possum on the porch, ma'am, the one nobody could move. Instead, somewhere along the way, you turned your microphone into a mailbox, and you charged your own people the postage. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of recognition. Maxine Waters' frozen index finger had been in the air for 19 minutes. It came down slowly onto the surface of the witness table. It didn't come back up. Maxine Waters stood up, not to yield, to fight. I will not be lectured on my own legacy by a man whose state ranks last in this country in every measure of human dignity. I will not be lectured by a senator who has voted in this body against every civil rights protection that has come before him. I will not be. Chairman Scott gavelled once. Madame Ranking Member, you re out of order. I'm not out of order, Mr. Chairman. You re out of order. This entire Senate is out of order. This entire Republican Party is out of order. You re complicit in the dismantling of... Chairman Scott gavelled twice. Madam, please. Reclaiming my time. I am reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. Madam Ranking Member, with respect, ma'am, the gentlewoman is the witness today. The gentlewoman doesn't control the time. The chair controls the time, and the chair is asking the gentlewoman to compose herself. I will not compose myself. I have spent 35 years. 3 gavels. The gavel cracked against the wooden base. Chairman Scott took a long breath. He wasn't a dramatic man. His voice was barely raised above conversation. Madame, ranking member, the chair is going to ask the senator from Massachusetts, the ranking member of this committee, whether the minority has any objection to a motion to suspend the witness's testimony for the remainder of this morning. He turned. He looked at Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator Elizabeth Warren. Maxine Waters, as fellow firebrand. Her ally of 13 years on the banking committee, the woman who called Maxine in 2018 the most fearless woman in the United States House of Representatives, didn't stand. She didn't lift her gavel. She said in a voice that the C-SPAN microphones almost didn't catch. Mr. Chairman, the minority has no objection to the chair's discretion. Maxine Waters turned slowly toward Senator Warren. Senator Warren didn't turn back. Maxine Waters turned slowly toward the row of observer seats, toward Joyce Beatty, the woman she'd called her sister. Joyce Beatty didn't turn back. Maxine Waters' hands came down to the witness table. She didn't pick up her papers. She didn't look at her press secretary. She didn't look at her chief of staff. She didn't look at Karen, who was watching from a hotel suite at the J.W. Marriott on Pennsylvania Avenue. She didn't look at Yolanda Mitchell. She didn't look at Sergeant Coleman. She said very quietly enough that the C-SPAN microphones almost didn't catch it. I yield. Chairman Scott tapped his gavel once, very gently. The witness yields. The committee will recess for 30 minutes. He set the gavel down. Maxine Waters didn't move from the witness table during the recess. Her chief of staff approached. She didn't respond. Her press secretary approached. She didn't respond. A reporter from the Washington Post, a black woman, a reporter Maxine Waters had personally selected for an extended profile interview in 2023, approached the witness table. A Capitol staffer blocked her path. When the committee returned 30 minutes later, the witness table was empty. Maxine Waters had left Hart 216 alone through the side door that leads to Constitution Avenue, without speaking to a single reporter in the hallway, without issuing a statement, without looking back at the room she'd just walked out of. Chairman Scott gave the afternoon panel to order at 1:12 in the afternoon. The afternoon panel proceeded as scheduled. Senator Cynthia Lummis testified on digital asset regulation. Senator Pete Ricketts asked her questions. She answered them. Nobody in that room mentioned Maxine Waters again. Even her own party walked out. Even Senator Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren wouldn't lift a finger to defend her. For those who had been waiting their entire lives to finally see what real, unfiltered accountability looked like on a national stage, this profound display in the Senate was only the beginning. Somewhere on Long Beach Boulevard in Compton, California, at 4:47 inches the afternoon Pacific time on the same day, Yolanda Mitchell unlocked the back door of Yolanda's Sweet Home Bakery, rebuilt in 2021, 2 doors down from the original location, and turned on the convection oven. Her son, Marcus, came in 15 minutes later. He took off his long-sleeve shirt. He wore short sleeves at home, only at home, and washed his hands in the deep sink. He started the dough for the next morning's bread. Yolanda Mitchell didn't cry. She'd cried in 2018. She'd cried at the lease eviction in 2019. She didn't have any more left. Somewhere in Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery, at 3:14 inches the afternoon Eastern Time, Sergeant Marcus Coleman knelt beside the white marble headstone of Lance Corporal Anthony Ramirez, his cousin, who lost his life in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, on the 7th of June, 2010. He was still in his dress greens. He didn't say his cousin's name out loud. He'd stopped doing that 9 years ago. On the advice of a chaplain at Camp Pendleton, Hootie understood that some prayers are better kept silent. He laid one hand on the stone. He left it there for 2 minutes. Then he stood up, brushed the grass off the knees of his trousers, walked back to his rental car, drove to Reagan, and was in the air on a Southwest Airlines flight back to Los Angeles International before sunset. Somewhere on the 4th floor of the Cannon House office building, at 5:58 inches the evening, Representative Joyce Beatty sat alone in her personal office. Her cell phone had received 43 calls. She hadn't answered. The only call she answered was from her son, Otto Beatty III, an attorney in private practice in Columbus, Ohio. He asked her one question. "Mom, was that hard?" She said, "No, baby. It was just true." He said, "Daddy would be proud, Mom." She said, "I know." She hung up. She sat in her office for another 40 minutes. Then she drove home. Somewhere in the Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, at 4:22 in the afternoon Pacific time, in a Tudor-style house on Rossmore Avenue, valued by the Los Angeles County Assessor's office at $4.3 million, a house 16 miles outside the boundaries of California's 43rd Congressional District, Maxine Waters sat alone in her front parlor. Her cell phone rang. Karen called twice. She didn't answer. Her chief of staff called once. She didn't answer. Her press secretary called. She didn't answer. She sat on the couch in the magenta Chanel suit, and she looked at the wall. Somewhere in Zachary, Louisiana, at 7:58 inches the evening Central Time, Senator John Kennedy walked into Uncle Beauregard's Bait and Tackle on Highway 64. His cousin Thibodeau was behind the counter. Thibodeau poured him a styrofoam cup of black coffee and slid it across the worn pine boards. "I saw it on the TV, John. You was real quiet today." Senator Kennedy said, "Wasn't he my place to be loud?" Thibodeau said, "Was that lady? Was she what they say she was?" Senator Kennedy said, "No, Thibodeau, she was. A long time ago. Then she just got tired." Thibodeau nodded slowly. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood beside his cousin, looking out the front window at the dirt lot where 18 years ago Senator Kennedy's own daddy had taught him to bait a trot line. Senator Kennedy drank his coffee. Within 72 hours, the bipartisan Pelosi Act, originally introduced by Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri in 2025, gained 17 new co-sponsors, including 4 Democratic Senators John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, Ruben Gallego of Arizona, and Michael Bennet of Colorado. Within a week, Representative Joyce Beatty appeared on NBC's Meet the Press and was asked by Kristen Welker whether she regretted her statement in Hart 216. She said, quote, "Not for 1 second. Mrs. Mitchell's son has scars. My friendship with Maxine does not." End quote. She didn't back down. Within a month, Karen Waters' consulting firm, Progressive Connections, registered in the state of California, quietly closed its doors. Its final filing with the Federal Election Commission was dated April 11, 2026. Within 3 months, Representative Maxine Waters announced that she would seek re-election in 2026. Her statement, released by her press secretary at 6:12 a.m. Pacific Time on a Saturday morning in June, didn't mention the hearing, didn't mention Yolanda Mitchell, didn't mention Joyce Beatty, didn't mention Sergeant Marcus Coleman, didn't mention Senator Kennedy, didn't mention the magenta Chanel suit, which her staff donated anonymously to a women's re-entry program in South Los Angeles called New Beginnings. She didn't give a farewell speech on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. She didn't accept a Congressional Gold Medal ceremony, though one had been offered. She left the Capitol on a Tuesday morning in January of 2027, through a side entrance of the Cannon House office building, accompanied only by her husband, Sidney Williams, and a single Capitol police officer she'd never met. Senator John Kennedy returned to the Senate Banking Committee the following Monday. He introduced, with Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona as primary co-sponsor, the Slate Mailer Reform Act of 2026. The bill prohibits federal campaign committees from operating commercial slate mailer businesses. It requires direct line family payments from federal campaign committees to be disclosed to the FEC on a monthly rather than quarterly basis. It passed the Banking Committee 18 votes to 5 on the 4th of May. Yolanda's Sweet Home Bakery received approximately $340,000 in unsolicited online donations in the 10 days following the hearing. Yolanda Mitchell used the money to hire 4 additional teenagers from Compton Unified School District. One of them, a 17-year-old boy named Deshaun Williams, learned to roll croissant dough on his 4th shift. He still works there. Sergeant Marcus Coleman returned to his National Guard unit the Monday after the hearing. He didn't give an interview. He hasn't given one since. The aftermath of that single morning in Hart 216 echoed far beyond the walls of Washington. It resonated deeply with working Americans, forgotten Americans, and people who spent 35 years watching the political machine operate without consequence. They needed to hear exactly what transpired in that room. The concept of accountability, so rarely seen in a Senate hearing room that nobody outside the Beltway had ever heard of, finally had a face and a clear definition. It was a profound truth that had been waiting its turn patiently for somebody brave enough to call it out. The story didn't just end with a recessed hearing, it rippled out into the lives of everyone involved, proving that sometimes real justice happens quietly. God bless Yolanda Mitchell of Compton, California. God bless her son Marcus, 25 years old, who works the dough every morning at 5:00 a.m. in long sleeves, so the regulars don't see what 2018 cost him. God bless Sergeant Marcus Coleman of the California Army National Guard, who served 3 deployments to a country that none of his colleagues in the United States Congress had served in. God bless Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio, who told the truth across 30 years of friendship when the truth was the harder road. God bless Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona, who stood up as a Marine before he stood up as a Democrat, after a phone call from his own party's leader the night before asked him not to. And God bless every American in every forgotten zip code of this country who's ever waited a generation to hear an elected official in a public room, on the record, with the cameras rolling, simply asked to explain why she charged her own daughter rent on the People's microphone. The gavel fell, the room emptied, and the woman who spent 35 years reclaiming her time finally ran out of it.